All right, so part two of this chapter, we're going to be covering vision. We're going to be first talking about the physical stimulus for vision, then the anatomy of the eye, and then our visual pathways and perception of visual input in our brain. So let's get going. All right, so like we've talked about in the last section, the visual stimulus that we actually see is light. And light travels in waves with two important properties we have to understand. So, first is wavelength. We perceive that as color. So, higher or lower wavelengths might be seen as red, green, blue, or purple. And then amplitude is perceived as brightness. So we have our baseline, and then how high that wave goes is how bright it is. So it could be really bright or really dim. And the distance between amplitude points is the color that we're perceiving. And the so going back again to the wavelength, that is based from the electromagnetic spectrum of visual light. So the electromagnetic spectrum ranges from cosmic rays through X-rays and ultraviolet light, TV, and radio waves. And so cosmic rays are these super tiny little waves, and then we have X-rays you probably have heard of before, ultraviolet light you probably have heard of before. We have this little teeny little sliver in the middle. That's the visible light that we actually can see as us humans. Above that is infrared light, microwaves, radar, and then TV, AM, FM radio, and then short waves. So again, we only see a small sliver of this from about 375 to about 775. And that goes from blue all the way up to this deep red, purpley shade. Other animals can see ultraviolet light or infrared light. Different instruments that we use in our day-to-day life will use these types of light. So infrared light is typically used with remote controls. That's why if you click the button on your remote, sometimes you see that little red light at the tip. That's actually using infrared light to communicate with your TV or your DVR or whatever it might be, your cable box. It's really quite interesting how narrow our visual spectrum is. That kind of blows people's mind. But again, there's other animals, like a lot of insects, can see ultraviolet light or infrared light. And if you look at things like flowers with filters that allow us to see the ultraviolet or infrared light, you actually see like new lines and patterns that kind of lead insects into the middle of the plant where the nectar and pollen is. So like bees can see it, butterflies, some birds. So they kind of helps bring them into the target area for that flower to be pollinated. It's really quite spectacular. So you may have asked this of yourself before, what does a dog see? So if you have a dog at home, a lot of people believe that dogs can't see color, but they actually do. They just don't see reds very well. So they typically will see things on the blue to yellow spectrum. They're not going to see red the same way that you and I do. There's actually a really cool app that I think you should check out. It's called See, SEE. It's like a purple, weird looking face. It's got a video that starts off, but once you get past that, it'll bring up your camera, hopefully, and allow you to kind of point it around your environment. And then you can see different types of color blindness, which we're going to talk about later on. And it will also, if you click on the little cat-shaped eye below it, it'll show you what other animals will see. So you can actually see what a dog sees. Spiders, octopus, eagles, and bees. Cats, sharks, nautilus, snails, planaria, and sea squirt larvae. So you can see the different types of eyes that are around the animal kingdom. It's quite a neat little app. So check that out. It's called CSEE. It's a purple, little square with a black, weird looking brain on it. So definitely check that out. It's pretty awesome. So let's talk for a little while about the anatomy of the eye. So here is what the eyeball looks like. It's almost a sphere, except for kind of the front area. It's not a perfect circle, but it's pretty close. Don't mind this upside down girl too much right now. So first what we have is this outside layer that kind of sits inside the skull, and it's surrounded by muscles that help move our eye around, up, down, side to side. And the whites of your eye is called the sclera, SCLERA. It's not on here. but it's called the sclera, and it's like a thick fibrous tissue. It helps protect the eye. There's a lot of blood vessels right below that. You kind of see the red here. That's got a lot of vascular tissue. And that's kind of like what forms this outside durable layer. Inside your eye, it's not like completely hollow. It's filled with fluid. It's kind of a thin gel-like fluid. It's called the viscous humor. Don't worry about the spelling of that, but that's um, what helps keep the shape of your eye. If you have too much pressure in your viscous humor, that's what's known as glaucoma. That's one of the things that they test for if you go to an eye doctor. They'll do that puff of air at your eye, which is really annoying and scary. What they're trying to do is sense how much pressure there is in your eye. So if you have too much pressure, you might take medication or do surgery to release that. And that's, again, caused by your viscous humor. So you need that, you just need the right amount. On the outside layer of our eye, we have our cornea. This is a thin layer of cells. It's usually just a couple cells thick, and this is that outside area, and it helps begin to focus light as it comes into our eyes. And the cornea, it has a lot of nerve endings in it. It doesn't have any blood vessels because it's clear. You have to be able to see through it, but it has nerve endings. That's why it hurts a whole lot if you get something on your eye. Below that, we have our iris. That's the colored section. It's actually made up of some smooth muscle tissue. It's colored. Most people, it's brown, but blue, green, gray, kind of the purplish side are all different colors of the iris. We each have a unique iris. It's kind of like our fingerprint, but even more unique than that. And it'll contract and expand depending on the light around us. So if it's a really dark room, your iris actually opens up and it lets more light in through your pupil, your lens, and then into your eye. If it's a really bright room, it contracts and it shrinks that pupil, and it makes it so that not much light is going to come in. It helps protect the eye from too much light stimulation. Now, the pupil itself actually isn't a physical structure, it's a hole. And that kind of blows people's mind too. Like, it's actually a hole that we consider the pupil. It looks black, but that's just because you're looking into a dark cavity behind it. And the iris is essentially creating the size of this pupil by opening up or shrinking in size. And that's what actually changes the size of the pupil. Behind that, we have our lens, and it's held in place by this little ring of some small muscles. And this lens here it's like a really dense plastic. If you were to pop it out of your eye, it's going to look like a little marble. But it gets stretched by these muscles to either be thinner or thicker depending on the focus of the image you're trying to see. So how far away or how close it is to you. And so light comes through and then it hits the back surface of your eye, which is called our retina. And this is what contains all the little receptor cells that pick up the light, and then it collects all the signal and it comes back here to your optic nerve, and your optic nerve goes back into your brain. So your retina is, most densely populated with receptors out here because, again, there's going to be a lot of light energy that hits here, and it gets thinner as you get closer to the front of your eye because even if light came in at an angle, it's only going to kind of hit to here. It's not going to hit like right over in this area. So the reason that this girl is upside down is that as light comes into your eye, it has to go through our lens. And if you've ever looked through a circle crystal or something like that, everything gets turned upside down. And it actually gets flipped and it goes upside down onto the back of your retina. So your retina actually is picking up this image upside down, sends the signal upside down back into your brain, and your brain is what actually flips it right side up again, which is pretty cool. You can actually trick your brain. You can get glasses, and we'll hopefully play with these in class, that will actually invert images in the environment. And if you wear them for long enough, your brain actually then begins, because you're actually putting things right side up on here, it'll actually flip it correctly onto your brain or in your brain, and it won't feel disorienting anymore. It won't feel upside down. You take the glasses off. It might take a couple hours, but you take the glasses off, then everything seems upside down again, even though you're actually back to right side up normally in the environment. But then your brain will figure it out again. You're just going to be dizzy for a while. So I don't recommend doing that at home, but it can be done. If someone you know has an astigmatism, that's essentially a misshaping of the eyeball itself. It might be too fat or too narrow, kind of like squished incorrectly. And so that can cause visual problems, and it's difficult to correct that with lenses. If someone has had LASIK, what they're actually doing is they cut a small amount of these cells and kind of flap it back from the cornea. Then they laser the surface of the cornea to help reshape it so that it's focusing better. They put the flap back on, the eye heals up, and then they can see without additional glasses. I actually had a version of LASIK done back in 2009, so it's been 10 years, and at least as of right now. And what they actually did, mine was called PRK. Instead of actually cutting the cornea, they do it right on the surface of the cornea. It's like an old version of LASIK. Now, LASIK existed back when I did it, but my doctor was concerned that because I was so young when I had it done, that there's a chance that that flap could get dislodged if I was in an accident or something hit me in the face really hard. So they did it right on the surface of the cornea. It takes longer to heal from that, so I had to wear a protective contact bandage essentially for 3 or 4 days, and then they took it off, and then it took about a week for my eyes to completely heal and have perfect vision. When you do LASIK, typically you don't have to wear the contact, and then you're fine the next day. And you can drive, and your vision is perfect. My dad had that done, and he was what they considered legally blind beforehand, and he could drive without glasses the next morning, which is pretty crazy. But he didn't have as much pain and recovery time as I did. So it just depends on what your doctor suggests for you. I do recommend LASIK if it's something that you're interested in. The surgery itself is kind of expensive, but if you think about how much you're going to pay for glasses and contact solution and eye exams and things like that throughout your life, it actually becomes more economical to get the LASIK done. So if it's something you're interested in, ask me more about it, talk to your doctor, your eye doctor. It's a really, really neat procedure, and it's not terribly painful. I'm going to try to put a video of a LASIK procedure in the YouTube channel for you guys to check out. There's also going to be a crash course video on the eye anatomy with some additional information. So if you have some more questions about eye anatomy, check that out. It'll explain it in greater detail. Now I'm going to be going on, and we're going to be focusing on this retina area, the optic nerve, and this little indent you see right here. This is not a mistake. This is called the fovea, and we're going to talk about that some more. If you're interested in seeing some really cool dilation of pupils, there's some videos in the playlist as well of a human pupil dilation and a cat pupil dilation, which is really neat to see it open and close like that. I also want you to check out the blind spot demonstration video. It is really, really cool, and I want you to do that first, and then we're going to move on and actually talk about our fovea and retina. All right, so on our retina, we have the light recepting cells, or the cells that pick up the light, which are called rods and cones. And they're called that because of their shape. So rods are used for viewing dim light with no color. They do black and white vision. And cones, they are good for bright light with color. So again, like I talked about with retina. Your retina, you don't have a whole lot of receptors kind of out here on the side. Most of them are kind of right in the back of your eye where the light's going to come in. And that's where we have what's called our fovea. It's this little indent right straight behind your lens, and that has the highest concentration of these cone cells that pick up color. But outside of that, we have mostly cells, these rods on the outside that pick up black and white, just light coming into our eye. So we have a lot of these cones for color right in the back of this fovea. This is what gives us our best vision, but peripherally we don't have as great of color vision. We have just good overall vision with, even within dim light. That's why if you're in your room and it's dark, you can't see color very well, and that's because the cones only work best with bright light. Your rods are kind of going more if they're in dim light. Or they're picking up even in dim light. They don't work better in dim light, but they can pick up more light than your cones can. We also have a spot here where the optic nerve actually travels back into our brain from our retina. And this actually creates what's called a blind spot, which you probably saw in this previous video. It's actually a little spot straight in the back of your eye, but just a little bit to the inside where there's no receptors. because, again, they're all collecting the information and they're sending it back to your brain. So there's no receptors in that area. Now, you're probably like, oh, I don't normally see a blind spot as I'm looking around the room. And that's because your brain is taking information from your left eye, your right eye, putting it together, and then it's filling in with its own knowledge of what should be there. So we don't normally perceive it unless we do something special like this blind spot demonstration. If you couldn't see it, I want you to try putting this full screen, maybe adjusting your distance from the computer screen a little bit closer, a little bit further away until you can see it. So we each have a blind spot in each of our eyes that we don't have any rods or cones in those sections, which is pretty crazy. So the rods and cones are the visual receptors located within our retina. They each contain pigments that get broken down by light energy. As the pigments break down, they start a series of chemical reactions that changes the activity levels of the visual system neurons, sending those action potentials back to our optic nerve that go back into our brain. The rods and cones are named after their shapes. The human eye contains about 120 million rods and about 6 million cones. There's a ton of these things in there. The rods are more sensitive to light than the cones and excel at seeing in dim light. So the rods become more common as we move away from the fovea to the peripheral of the retina. So your peripheral vision does a better job at viewing in dim light than your central vision does. You can go test this out at night, maybe in your bedroom with no additional light added. This extraordinary sensitivity of rods, though, has costs. Rods do not provide information about color, nor do they provide clear, sharp images. So everything's kind of blurry at night. When you turn that light on, the color comes back, and so does that crispness with the cones in your fovea. The cones function best under bright light and provide the ability to see both sharp images and color. So information, this is a weird image, I know, but I'm going to explain this. So we have the information coming into our eyes. The optic nerve then travels back from our eye into our brain. Then it jumps, as we talked about with the contralateral organization of our brain, so things get swapped side to side. That happens in what's called our optic chiasm. The signals begin to switch sides and they go back through the optic tracts into our brain. They're then relayed to the thalamus, which does the first step of processing, and then it then relays it back into our occipital lobe. And again, our occipital lobe is organized so that this is the right side of this person's brain. It's actually picking up information from the left eyeball and vice versa. It's actually pretty cool how it's reverse organized. And again, this is where it does the processing that actually flips the image right side up again. So we also need to understand that perception of color is based off the different response rates of 3 kinds of cones. So we only have cones for blue, green, and red. We don't have cones for yellow, orange, or purple, or white. And depending on the rate of the firing for each of these cones, we see different colors. So if we have a lot of firing in their blue cones, we see blue. If you get a lot of the green, we see green. If we get a lot of red, we see red. But if we're going to see yellow, it's different than if you had a color wheel with paint and pigments. Light works differently. So green and red together, we perceive yellow. Depending on the rate of the red, green, and blue, we'll see orange, purple, or white. It's actually really interesting that yellow is actually a combination of green and red when it comes to light waves, not pigments. So if you're used to mixing paint colors, it's actually going to be a little bit different, especially when it comes to that yellow, which is really interesting. Same thing happens with our TV screens, cell phones, computer screens. If you were to kind of put a drop of water onto your screen, you're actually going to see the little pixels kind of be amplified, and you can kind of begin to see the color breakdown there. So with this color theory, so understanding the rate of firing and the pigments that get broken down, we can do what's called the opponent process, or understand the opponent process theory of color vision. So what I want you to do is stare at this center dot of this flag right here, and stare at it without moving your eyes and try not to blink for as long as you can for about 30 seconds. And then you're going to move your eye over here to the dot over here, and you're probably going to see, hopefully, the American flag show up. Red, white, and blue, not green, black, and yellow. So what you've done is by staring at the green, black, and yellow flag is you've broken down these green, black, and yellow pigments in your eye so that when you move over to the clean screen, your brain is actually, or your eyes are actually only have the opposite pigments available. And this after image is a demonstration of the opponent process theory. So this theory proposed that there's an existence of an opposing color channel, so the red-green channel, the yellow-blue channel, and the black-white channel. There's some other really cool images you can do. There's ones of like Obama and Jesus and things like that. And usually they're just done with black and white. They look like blobs. And then when you look at a blank screen or a blank wall, what you'll actually see is the image, this after image that appears. I'm going to try to put those down in the YouTube channel for you guys to check out. Oh yeah, so here's Obama. So stare at like the center of the face for about 30 seconds. And now look somewhere else, a blank wall, or you can even close your eyes. You should be able to see Obama's face kind of show up. Might be a little disconcerting, but it's pretty cool. So I want you guys to take a look at these circles made of the little dots. What numbers do you see? You're probably seeing a 74 on the left, maybe a 71, and then on the right side you're going to see an 8. If you can't see these numbers, or you're struggling to kind of see the outline, you may have what's called color weakness or color blindness. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. So color blindness is the inability to distinguish two or more shades in the color spectrum. Going back to these images, the most common color blindness issue is red and green color blindness, and that's why these images typically trip up the most number of people, or most commonly. Even maybe you might see something else, or you might kind of just see the big changes. That could just be some color weakness. People who are called monochromats, they have what's called total color blindness. So their worlds do look black and white. This is very rare, and it results in individuals only having rods and only one kind of functioning cone instead of having all three. So they'll only have a red cone, a green cone, or a blue cone, or cones, sorry, but they only have one of the three colors. They don't have all three. Dichromats, they're more common. They have trouble distinguishing typically between red and green because they only have two kinds of functioning cones. So they'll have green and blue or red and blue. This is an inherited genetic defect which results in seeing mostly shades of blue and yellow, and it can differ in severity. So it can be really severe, it can be really mild. It's really common in males. Between 7 and 10% of males and only about 0.4% of females have a form of red-green color blindness. Males are more affected than females because the genes for the pigments of the red and green cones are located on the X chromosome. So as you know, women have 2 X chromosomes and males have an XY chromosome. Essentially, the X has that additional little component, that extra arm that males don't have. So if they're missing it on one half, on their one X, they don't have another X to make up for it. So they're missing that little piece. So males are much more likely to have color blindness. It's much smaller numbers of people. They lack the blue cones altogether, which is less than 1%, or cones altogether. Some people just don't have any cones, but that's extremely rare. Now, most people think of being colorblind as being a really bad thing. It's like a defect. It's a disability. There are certain jobs that you can't have if you're colorblind. So you can't be a fighter pilot or an astronaut if you're colorblind. You can't work in a lot of law enforcement agencies. A lot of police forces won't take people who are colorblind because you can't, person in a red shirt going down the street, just mug that guy. Like, it might be a green shirt, you don't know. So you have to be able to see color to work in a lot of these agencies. But we're going to talk about kind of some ways to get around that. But it's also a benefit in certain areas. So being colorblind actually has some benefits. One of which is that people who are colorblind, they're not fooled by camouflage the way that most people are. So because they're seeing the overall outline and pattern structure, and they're not necessarily paying attention to color, they can see a moth laying on a piece of bark really easily. They can pick out a person wearing camouflage, or you've seen the fake forest netting that they'll put over camps in wartime. They can actually pick those things out. So in World War II, it was common that they'd put a colorblind person with each of the bombing planes because they could pick out like say, the German camps below them because they could see that netting change from the treetops, and a person who has normal color vision couldn't see that. They can also, especially if they're monochromats, they can actually see better at night, and they can also see better underwater. There's a really interesting group of people in Polynesia that there's a high rate of monochromatic color blindness there. And they usually will hunt at night underwater for fish. They live in Polynesia. Fish are probably their primary source of food. So people who actually have this monochromatic color blindness actually have a selective advantage. So they've actually been selected for in this community because they can hunt better at night underwater to get fish, which is pretty darn cool. I'm going to try to add some more information about this in the YouTube channel below if you want to check that out. So again, here's another one of these tests. A person with color blindness, with the red-green color blindness, the dichromats, they would have a hard time distinguishing between the red circle and the green circle. They might look at like the same shade, and they'd probably really struggle to see the 29 in this circle of dots in the middle. Now there are some glasses that you can get now called Enchroma glasses that allow people who have color blindness to it kind of changes the wavelengths and allows their brain to distinguish between these colors for the first time. I'm going to put a couple videos of that. It's one of those things, if you ever want like a good happy cry, go watch people getting these Enchroma glasses and putting them on for the first time. It's really quite spectacular to see how much of a difference it makes for them. So go check that out. Dark adaptation is our increased retinal sensitivity to light. So if you've ever gone to bed, you turn off the light and you try to walk to your bed, you probably can't see anything in your room. But if you wait 10 minutes or so, you can begin to kind of make out the shapes in your room, and maybe in the middle of the night you wake up, you can pretty much see everything in your room. It's black and white, and it maybe isn't as crisp again, but you're able to see, the shape of most of like the furniture in your room. It takes 30 to 35 minutes for our eyes to reach maximum visual sensitivity, and you have to really keep out any other bits of light during that time period. So if you ever go out to look at the stars at night, try to get away from artificial lighting, so lights in your house, street lights. Don't look at your phone in the meantime, even with the darkness or the light turned all the way down. Make sure you go somewhere that's really good and dark, and you'll be able to see way more stars. I don't know if any of you have ever gone out and been able to see the Milky Way. You can't see it here in South Florida. There's just too many lights in the environment. But if you go somewhere in the middle of nowhere, maybe out in the Everglades, you get away from some street lights and car lights. You probably north central Florida, you might be able to see it. If you ever go camping or out on the water, you might be able to see the Milky Way. It's really impressive. And it's just something that you can't see in any sort of city or town. Our eyes can become 100,000 times more sensitive to light with this dark adaptation. And the rods contain a light-sensitive visual pigment that's called rhodopsin. When it's struck by light, the visual pigments begin to bleach and break down chemically. And again, our rods are extremely insensitive to red light. So if you ever need to use like a flashlight to go out into the forest and you want to go stargazing, use a red light. A lot of headlights or flashlights will have a red light feature, and you can use that in low light environments without changing your dark adaptation. A lot of animals also can't see this red light, so you can actually use it to walk around and not bother animals. If you want to go out at night and catch lizards in your backyard, use red light or black lights. They work pretty well too. Maybe not for the dark adaptation, but to see animals at night. I was able to go to Costa Rica, and we did some work with hatching sea turtles, and at night we used the red light headlamps in order to handle the baby sea turtles without bothering them because they couldn't see the light. For them, it was like being in pitch black darkness. All right, so this is the end of our vision section, and next we're going to be talking about hearing.